What we are going to talk about is drip irrigation, though. We're going to get into that for the next 15 or 20 minutes. Basically, when you're planning and designing for a drip irrigation system, one of the first things you want to do is think about the emitter placement. So often, I see emitters placed right at the base of the plant, right there at the base of the plant. You don't want to do that. You want to place the emitters at what we call the canopy line or the drip line, out here at the outer edge of the canopy. You want to do that because you want to encourage those roots to move out. You don't want all your roots grouped up together right here at the base of the plant. You're not going to have good anchorage. You're probably going to promote root rot. You want those roots moving out here. You want the water out here. Plant roots do not move through dry soil to seek out water. They exist where there is already water available. Okay, plants don't have some magical powers to move through dry soil.
Would you put 2 emitters per plant?
Quite possibly, yes. One on either side. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute, too, because that's a good question. A lot of people, they just guess. I don't know. I'm going to put 2 or 3 or 4 emitters around. Why? I don't know, because somebody else told me to, or I saw it somewhere else. Well, let's make some good decisions here based on practical information, right? Okay, I'm going to focus on the drip here, but here's we'll say one thing about sprinklers. If you have them, by law, they should be 24 inches away from any non-permeable hardscape. Basically, that's to prevent the overspray and runoff that is so common in landscapes. So with a drip system, you got your pressure regulator, your filter, your backflow prevention device, your emitters, and your tubing. For your automatic controllers, you're going to have a valve. So this part right here with the wires attached to it is the solenoid. Backflow prevention in a landscape irrigation system is easily obtained with this type of valve here. This is an anti-siphon valve attached to it. This is the actual body of the valve that has a diaphragm that lifts up and down when the solenoid is activated to allow water to flow through. And this acts similarly to that atmospheric vacuum breaker device I was talking to you about earlier on the hose bib. It does not allow water to flow backwards. Water will be dumped out of here because it allows air in and it breaks any vacuum that might happen. These need to be installed at least 6 inches above the highest emitter in your landscape. So these should always be above ground. This is just a typical globe automatic solenoid valve without the backflow protection. These will be installed below ground, typically in a valve box. Again, got your solenoid on here to activate it. I'd recommend using the one with the backflow prevention. Okay, maybe it's not the most pleasing thing to look at in the landscape, but you can install it right up against the house and pretty much hide it from your view. Okay, so you want a hydrozone. I think you folks are probably familiar with this. You put plants with similar water needs and similar horticultural requirements in the same areas so you can irritate. You don't want to irritate your plants. You want to irrigate your plants. And you can irrigate them in a similar fashion. It's difficult to have a high water use, a low water use, and a medium water use plants all in the same area. So one of them's not going to be happy, okay? Make sure you're choosing the climate appropriate plants like I mentioned earlier. Select the right place for your plants. So often I see plants that want to be much larger than they are and they're right up against the sidewalk at somebody's front door and the person's always complaining about having to hack it back and prune it back. Well, yeah, that's a pain. It probably doesn't look that great because it's not allowed to do what it naturally wants to do. And you're actually increasing the water requirements. Every time you prune it way back, because what's that plant want to do? Shoot out a bunch of new growth. And what's that plant going to do in order to make that happen? Suck up a lot more water. Okay. So if you have a small area, put in a small plant. Pretty simple. So we're talking about hydrozoning by valve. You don't want to mix different application methods. So you don't want sprinklers on the same valve as drip. I've seen it. You don't even want micro sprinklers on the same valve as drip. Why? They have different application rates. So you'll be applying much more water here than you will over here. Separate valves for different application methods. Okay, we've talked about all this already, and I'm assuming you astute folks here are familiar with the basic concepts of hydrozoning and getting the right plants in the right place. Okay, I can't tell you enough to add mulch. For a new landscape, 4 to 6 inches. And then you replenish by half of the original application every year. So if you originally applied 6 inches, every year plan on adding 3 inches more. Wood mulch is typically what's used, or something similar to that. There's, yard waste that's also available that's ground up and used. But basically that mulch will decompose over time, so you need to replenish it so that you have a nice thick layer to retain that soil moisture, help prevent erosion, help keep weeds down. Yes, Leslie?
So how would you do the deep watering for the trees and for plants that need it? Like in the same area you have the salvia, so would you have,
right,
like, how would you?
Okay, good. So in this photo right here, let's say that most of these shrubs here, you've got some salvias and penstemon, and I don't know, that looks like some kind of blue oak grass or something, lantana, very low water use plants. They're all in the same valve, but then there's this tree right here on a different valve. It's likely irrigated with bubblers. Like I mentioned earlier, the bubblers are underground, so it's a totally different valve that's set to come on with different run times, different start times, etc.
Why not just a lot of drippers?
You could, but that
That's
tree
why
might
easier
have
to
different
install
water.
than
That
the
tree might have
valve.
different water requirements, and if that tree might have different water requirements and might need more or less water than these other plants, and that's hard to accommodate on the same valve.
Well, they make 10-gallon per hour drippers.
Yeah, well, I would argue against putting 10. I don't know if there's 10 gallon. There's definitely 2 gallon per hour. So usually it's half gallon per hour, 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallons per hour. Maybe there are some out there that even do more than that. But you don't even want to mix those up on the same line because, again, you just end up putting more water in different places. You want to have even coverage throughout your entire irrigation system. You can mix and match emitters, but if you do, I suggest you read this book. We're going to go through a really simple irrigation, drip irrigation design and scheduling today, but it's going to involve using the same type of emitter throughout. And you can do it, but it just takes some time and some math, and it's worth it. It's totally worth it. You will
Because you
be
end
better
up
off
having
for
to
it.
do one whole valve for one tree, maybe.
Maybe, or maybe not, or maybe you can get more creative. I'm not saying it's not doable, but it gets a bit more complicated, and certainly too complicated for us to discuss in 90 minutes. I'm going to keep moving through, folks. We're not going to talk about lawns. Basically, if you have a lawn, aerate it at the very least. And yeah, you can get rid of it. There's also lots of low water use lawn alternatives these days. Delta Bluegrass is a company that makes native and very low water use grasses in sod form. You can roll out your California native grass.
Okay.
That's a beautiful thing. Drip irrigate it with subsurface drip irrigation. I've seen some really nice landscapes that are doing that these days. So folks can still have the grass, have the lawn, have the look and the feel, but not use a lot of water. This is what I mean about the regular maintenance. This stuff happens all the time, whether it's a sprinkler or a drip. You don't know unless you check. Okay, again, I'm just going to skip through a lot of this. Let's see. Other than reminding you to flush out your system and clean your filters at least once per year. Yes, question?
For maintenance, checking on the irrigation drip as the plant grows and it's...
You likely want to move those emitters farther out over time. That's right. Not very difficult to do with the button emitters. You just remove it, put in what's called a goof plug. There's probably one up here somewhere to fill in that older hole, and then move your emitter farther out because plants do grow over time. It's a very good point. All right, here's what you need to know about irrigation scheduling in 15 or 20 minutes or less. How much? How much does your system deliver? Typically, that's going to be referred to as your precipitation rate or your application rate. How evenly is the water applied? How uniformly is that water applied across the landscape? The higher the better. Usually that's called distribution uniformity. Those in the know will say DU. How much water do you need to apply? So we'll talk a bit about evapotranspiration and your plant water requirements and your irrigation water requirement. So your plant water requirement and your irrigation water requirement are not necessarily the same, because the irrigation water requirement is a function of the plant water requirement and the uniformity of the system. No irrigation system is 100% uniform. None. Right out the box, brand new, beautiful, shiny drip irrigation system is not 100% uniform. It's probably pretty close. As designed and installed well, it is pretty close, probably 90 to 95%. But nothing's perfect. We don't live in a perfect world, so you need to account for that. Sprinklers are even worse. Sprinklers, brand new irrigation system, sprinkler system, typically 65 to 75% uniform. Brand new, right out the box, you're starting behind already. Okay, this is a great slide here because it's a good visual of what we're doing underground. Basically, your field capacity is it refers to the amount of water that's available to the crop until you get to a permanent wilting point. Your managed allowable deficit, sometimes it's called maximum allowable depletion. They both have the same acronym, so who cares what you call it? That's your threshold for how much water you're willing to lose because the plants are using up the water through transpiration, evaporation's happening off the soil and plant surfaces. How much water are you willing to lose out of that soil reservoir that composes the active root zone of your plants? How much water are you willing to lose before you're putting on some more water? Typically, with low water use, drought tolerant plants, we're talking 50, 70%. But you don't want to get down here to permanent wilting point because it's just what it sounds like. Permanent. Your plant's done. You need to start over. So you want to keep it within this range, and really within this range, the readily available crop water. That's the water that's there. The plants can easily access it. Move it through the plant, also moving nutrients through the plant, and then it's released through the stomata and the leaves. You don't want to apply too much though, because you get runoff and deep percolation, and the water is not available to the plants. And your goal is to grow happy and healthy plants.
Is it different for each plant, each type of plant?
That's right.
How deep they are rooted?
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so how do you determine evapotranspiration rates? You just guess. You could guess, but you're probably not going to be good at it. So, what I recommend is using CIMIS, the California Irrigation Management Information System. We call it CIMIS. Right here, CIMIS. The Department of Water Resources runs this program. They have about 160 or so weather stations throughout the state. We have a few here in Santa Cruz County that's providing almost real-time data. Every hour it's updated. You can go to their website and find weather data for an area probably very close to where you live. Now, obviously, you don't have weather stations in everyone's backyard. So here in Santa Cruz County, there's one up at De La Viega. There's a couple of active ones in Watsonville, and I think there might be one or two more around here that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But very good, accurate information. Farmers use this information a lot. And it's freely available. Your tax money is paid for it. Why not use it? So then we'll talk a bit about reference evapotranspiration. What are your plant water requirements? We discussed briefly the uniformity. Again, CIMIS, California Irrigation Management Information System. And we'll talk about some irrigation scheduling. So just to be clear, evapotranspiration, ET, it's not the movie with the alien, right? It's evaporation plus transpiration. So water is evaporating from soil and plant surfaces. It is being transpired through the plant and released through the stomata back into the atmosphere as water vapor. For scheduling purposes, it is the description of the amount of water that you need to replace. And it's something that you can pretty easily calculate. There are 4 main factors that contribute to evapotranspiration. Number 1 is solar radiation. The number 1 driving factor, wind, humidity, and temperature. So this might be something that you'd see on the SEMIS website. This is historical data here, data for the, 6 or 7 different SEMIS stations in Santa Cruz County. The exercise that we will do shortly will be focusing on number 104 up at De La Viega. So you'll see what I was talking about earlier. We have a definite bell curve, very clear. It's basically the opposite of the rainfall curve. If I put the 2 curves up here, one would be like this for evapotranspiration, the other would be like this for rainfall. Okay? May, June, July, August are the high evapotranspiration months. They're usually our warmest, sunniest months. We also receive virtually no rainfall. Basically, there's no rainfall from May through October, right? So these are going to be your highest water use months. And in particular, we focus on June because that is the highest water use month.